Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk this week. Our topic is, I'm okay. Everything is okay. Please send help. And it's all about why it is so hard for some of us to ask for help when we need it. And I wrote the essay about just a moment from a few weeks ago where I was just having a tough time. And I am someone who, for the most part, if I'm having a hard time with anything in any area of my life, my tendency is to solve it myself, to try to really figure out what's going on with me, to soothe my own nervous system, to examine what feelings are arising and what the root might be, and to, just kind of take care of it on my own. And that's okay, but it's probably not okay during those times where you just feel really overwhelmed. And I've had that in my life. I have had times in my life and moments in my life where I really did feel in over my head. There were times when I was a single mom. My kids were tiny. When my first marriage ended, my son was 4 and my daughter was 1.5. I was still nursing. I was working at a full teaching schedule. I owned a studio. I was doing all of the scheduling and, of course, teaching my own full schedule of classes, which I managed to do while my kids were either in preschool or I had, a sitter. A lot of the time when my kids were infants, I would just bring them to class with me, and there's a lot going on. Plus I was doing the schedule for everyone else and hiring and sometimes firing, which is never fun or easy, and doing the schedule for the studio and doing events for the studio and community building and all the social media. I had a lot on my plate. And I was blogging. This is back in the days when we blogged. And so I would often, at the end of the day, finally sort of put my kids to bed. They would go to sleep. And then I would write until 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes the screen would just be blurring in front of my eyes. And I would finally fall asleep. And then I'd get up at 6 or 7 and do it again. And that went on for years. And those were really painful times for me. I think that vision that I had of my family, everyone living under one roof happily, when that sort of fell apart, it brought up all of my childhood stuff. And writing was one way that I was processing all of that and integrating all of that and working through all of that. But I was hurting. It was a really painful time in my life, and I didn't reach out to very many people at all. A handful of people I think that I was open with about, this is tough. But for the most part, I'm leading a yoga community. I'm showing up at the studio. I'm teaching my classes. And that is one thing I've always been able to do is when I walk into a space where I am needed, I can put my stuff down, and just show up. And I'm grateful that I'm able to compartmentalize in that way. When I walk in to teach, whether I'm teaching a yoga class or I'm doing a talk or whatever it is, I am able to shift focus. But part of that is because my wiring was set up to take care of other people. And so that's one of the things that I really want to talk about today is what your role, what your experience was as a child, as far as, what were you the peacemaker, the secret keeper, like what was in your family of origin, what role were you assigned and what role were you playing? And for me, it was certainly those two things, secret keeping for both my mom, because eventually around the time I was 7, she started to drink regularly and heavily, and she became an alcoholic. So, and that was not talked about. Not only was it not talked about outside the house, it wasn't even dealt with inside the house. There was no, as I got older, when I was little, when you're a child, you don't know why someone is behaving the way they're behaving. You don't make the connection between alcohol and behavior. All you know is your mother's enraged and you don't know what you did wrong, and it's terrifying. That's it. You don't have any sense that, alcohol was in the mix here. So it wasn't until I was 12 or 13, I think, that I started to understand, wait a second, there's a connection between the drinking and the behavior. But that was not a conversation that was going to happen in my mother's house. And this is not atypical in the alcoholic household system. Most of the time you have an alcoholic and then you have enablers, or you have other alcoholics in the mix, because it becomes normalized that way. If everybody's drinking heavily into the point where they are slurring or they can't walk across the room, then it's not, then everyone's on the same page. So that's what you're going to have. You're going to have alcoholics with other alcoholics and enablers. And when I say these words, I just want to be really clear. I'm saying them with a lot of compassion. I am not, alcoholism is generally a sign of deep inward pain. It's someone who is trying to numb the pain, and that is the coping mechanism that they're using. Is it destructive? Yes. Is it a good coping mechanism? No. But there's pain underneath it. And if someone is enabling, that's generally also someone who's in pain or in fear, and the fear is, if I stand up to this person, I'm going to be banished. I'm going to be, that's it. Love will be withdrawn. And a lot of anxiously attached people can also enable, because that's the fear, right? You don't want to be banished. And so that's what I was dealing with. And as I got older, I think I loved my mother so much, and I wanted her to get help, and I wanted her to choose me, choose me over the Chardonnay, like make me more important. But it doesn't work like that. It's not how addiction works, and it's not how alcoholism works. And that's not really, that's not the fight that's happening there. But what happens when you are growing up in that kind of a system is your wiring is not being set up to ask for help. Your wiring is being set up to hide the fact that you need help. My mother was very big on, we don't air our dirty laundry. Even if she had been willing to talk about it inside the house, that would have been helpful. But that wasn't even the case. It was very much like, I don't have a problem. I'm a social drinker. I have a high-powered job. I'm successful. You are overly sensitive. And, they would call me Sarah Bernhardt. That was like those were the labels that were put on me. That was overly sensitive and dramatic. And so it's gaslighting, right? Like, here I am, I'm a kid, and I'm like, this doesn't feel okay. This doesn't seem right. And by the way, I'm the target of all of this rage. And yet when I say anything about it, or I try to have a conversation, I'm told, no, my perception is incorrect. And the problem is not with my mother or her drinking, it's with my perception and my ability to perceive reality correctly. So that was on that side of the situation. And on my dad's side, and I've written about this and talked about it a lot, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but my dad was he was a womanizer, like, of Olympic proportions. He if there had been an Olympic sport, he would have won the gold. He was just, it was like, yeah, wow, 70s, but forget about the 70s. Like it was, even to this day as a grown woman, I rarely see this kind of constant need for validation and affirmation. And, so I think there was like a large dose of narcissism in the mix there, but he made me I've coined this term wing child, because he used to bring me on these dates with him, and then we would go home to my stepmom and he would say we went to the playground or we went to the museum, and not that we had gone to some woman's house and he had parked me in front of her TV and gone to bang her in the other room. So, sorry, that was not delicately put, but that was what I was growing up with there. And I kept those secrets. And he would then sob in my arms and tell me he couldn't commit, and all these women wanted him to commit and he needed to be free. And so I thought he was the victim of this like horrible situation. So my job was to help, right? It was to keep his secrets, keep my mother's secrets, try to figure out how I could help my mom and my dad to be happy, to be peaceful, and also to keep myself safe. So if you're growing up in anything like that, where you're parentified, it doesn't have to be that extreme, but you are either, you're being tasked with adult responsibilities, or you are secret keeping for any reason, or you're being forced to grow up a lot more quickly than, certainly is ideal, you're not wired to ask for help. You are wired to figure out like how to take care of yourself and other people. And if you have problems, to figure out how to handle those on your own time and in your own way. And so when I went out into the world, I was anxiously attached. I had a huge fear of abandonment. I'd had years of gaslighting. I didn't trust myself or my ability to perceive things properly. I would start a lot of conversations with my friends like, am I crazy, or does this seem like not okay? Is it me? Or, so that was like kind of the context. And in every relationship that I had, I was very comfortable helping. If you needed to move across town, if you needed to write an essay and you had waited too late, if you needed to study all night, like I was your gal, I'm there, I'm ready to help you paint your living room, or, move out of your abusive boyfriend's house. I'm there. Like I'm ready to, be of service. But if I needed help, it was really, really hard for me to ask. I felt unworthy of asking for that kind of help. And there were situations, and if you experience this, and I think that like just based on the response to the essay, which has been enormous, this is a topic for a lot of people. I think a lot of people really struggle to say, hey, I need some help, or I'm feeling really overwhelmed, or I just need to fall apart right now, and I need for that to be okay. I think a lot of people really struggle, and it's not necessarily that we're all coming out of the same exact background, but just that high level of chaos and uncertainty and parentification, like any of that stuff can lead to this result of just having a tough time asking for help. And then there's like society too, the culture, and everybody wants to look like they're crushing it and things are going great, and here's my highlight reel, and everything's terrific. And when you're in the wellness world, which I've been in the wellness world for 30 plus years now, there's so much pressure, to make everything look pastel and shiny and beautiful. And I've always kind of railed against that, because I think toxic positivity is incredibly harmful and alienating for people, And to me, a meaningful spiritual practice is going to be one that serves you when things are difficult, and one where you can be open and honest about whatever struggles you have. We all have our stuff. And the teachers that pretend that they are floating above the surface of the earth and they've got it all figured out, the teachers, the preachers, the grifters, those people, they terrify me. Those are the people that always, you just all you need to do is be patient. All the stuff's going to come flying out of the closet at some point. So those people have never been my people. Like when I see someone saying Shri, Shri, like all day long, I know you got a closet full of darkness somewhere that you are actively like keeping off of your social media feed. We all have the shadow stuff that we're dealing with and the painful things that we're dealing with. And so I've always been attracted to teachers who are open about that. And certainly that is that's always where I'm coming from when I'm writing, when I'm teaching, when I'm doing anything, is to be totally open as best I can, as fearlessly as I can be about it, to just be, to put it out there. And so this is my ongoing work. My ongoing work is to ask for help when I need it. And it's still something I'm working on. It's not something that I have overcome and, solved and, check, that's done. And that's one of the things that I was talking about too, is that healing, we talk about healing a lot. To me, healing is not a finish line. It's not a destination. It's not like you run the marathon and at the end of the marathon, you cross the finish line and you are done. You are healed, and the rest of your life, you just get to coast. Like, that is not it. Because we're always evolving. We're always changing. The situation is always changing. Believe me, I'm 53 years old. I've been doing yoga for 30 years. I still surprise myself. There are still times where I'm like, wow, I did not see that coming. There is a feeling I'm having that is really surprising to me and out of left field. And let me just pause and allow that feeling in so I can understand myself more deeply. I learned this lesson. I had a private client not long after I moved to Los Angeles, and he was 70 when I met him, or maybe 72. And I worked with him for like 15 years. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life. He's a child psychologist. He was a brilliant man, funny, irreverent guy. I mean, he used to, when I was pregnant with my son and then later with my daughter, he would recite these limericks that were the dirtiest, just funniest. He was just a funny man. And became one of my really close friends. And it's a great thing to be close friends with someone who is a lot older, because you get a different perspective. And I realized with him, we're never done. I think prior to my close friendship with him, I thought, well, surely by the time you're in your 70s and 80s, you've got yourself figured out. You got the world figured out. You've got things figured out. No, you don't. It's always changing. You're always growing. And I think the people that are young at heart and young in mind are the people who allow themselves to keep developing new neural pathways and to keep thinking about things in new and different ways. And I will give my dad some credit. He was a person like that. He had an open mind. He was not judgmental, very creative, and always that way, really until the end. So it's never you can't paint somebody with one brush or another. He was not a good person to have as your dad. But I think he was a good friend and a good uncle, So, that was a tangent. So anyway, just this whole idea of struggling to ask for help, and a few other things happened along the way that certainly didn't help. And one of them I have written about before. And again, I'm not going to talk about it at length right now. I know it can be triggering for people, but just very briefly, I was assaulted in a stairwell when I was 13 years old on my way to ballet. And I wrote about it I think the essay is called Exposed, When You Aren't Held by the Ones You Need. I'm pretty sure that's the subtitle, so you can find it. But basically what happened is I was attacked. I got away, but it was terrifying. I was 13 years old, and I raced into the ballet studio, and they, I was sobbing. I couldn't even speak, but they knew instantly, and they called my mom. They ran. They tried to catch the guy. It was too late, but they called my mom, and they told her what had happened. I was shaking, nervous system, of course. It's trauma. It's traumatic. And she didn't come. And I don't know why she didn't come. And I could never ask her, because that was the kind of question that would have enraged her. It would have enraged her to be questioned about why she didn't come and get me. But I was sitting there when they called, and they told her, like, your daughter's been attacked in the hallway, in the stairwell, and she's not okay. And my mom basically said she couldn't come. I don't know why. She was 4 blocks away. And so the question then became, do you want to stay and take class and have one of the dancers walk you home, or do you want to have one of the dancers walk you home now? And I stayed and took class, because I knew, first of all, I was just beside myself. And secondly, I knew that if I went home, I didn't have the kind of mom who was going to put her arms around me and talk to me about what had happened and tell me it was going to be okay. She just wasn't. I think she just had so much of her own trauma. She couldn't do that stuff. So I knew that I would just end up going into my room and crawling into bed crying, and I didn't want to do that. So I stayed and took class, and really tried to calm myself, and get in my body. And even then, I guess intuitively, like, I knew that would be a better option for me. But what ended up happening in my 13-year-old brain is I needed help. I needed her to come. I needed it desperately, and she didn't. And the message I got was, you are not worth it for me to overcome whatever I need to overcome to get there. And even that wasn't it, because like at 13, I wasn't thinking she had any major thing to overcome to show up. I just thought, I don't know, maybe my little brother's asleep and she doesn't want to wake him from his nap, but like, really? It just felt like, wow, how is she not coming to get me? And it was a defining moment, and it really stuck with me. And there's some shame there of needing help and being denied, being essentially told in word or in action, you're not worth it to me to come. And I know that that's not what it was now as a grown woman. I know that it's not that I wasn't worth it to her. I don't know if it was her own rage about the reality of being a girl in this world, or a woman, or someone who is easily overpowered. I don't know if it was her own rage about that, or her own feelings of powerlessness, or her own trauma. Her dad died when she was 13. And a lot of the time with my mother, as I got older, if I remembered that her 13-year-old was driving the bus, like, it would help me understand her and her behavior more, and I was able to then have more empathy, more compassion. I don't know if her 13-year-old self was just like, I can't do anything for my daughter's 13-year-old self right now. I don't know how to help. I don't know how to show up. I can't do this. I don't know what happened. Like, I'll never know. But I know that was a moment that she failed to show up for me. And it was something that stuck, unfortunately. And the worst thing in the world is, if you're already struggling to ask for help, the fear that you're going to be denied. When you expose that soft underbelly, when you expose your jugular and you say, I'm actually not okay right now, and I really could use some help or use some support, and the answer is no. It's like better not to ask than to put yourself in that situation, because it just compounds the sort of shame of needing help in the first place. And or if you are worried about how you're being perceived, that might come into play as well. So I don't worry about that. I will tell you openly, like, I really actively fight it. I'm not worried about that. I do not have anything to hide or anything to prove, and I don't have any energy to pretend. I spent too much of my life as a child, as a teenager, as a young adult, trying to make everything look perfect on the outside. I know better. Like, that is something I have absolutely overcome. And all you have to do is read the stuff I write. I'm pretty transparent about, everything. Because I feel the more that we talk about these things and bring them into the light, the more other people don't feel alone in their own struggles, whatever they might be. We're not going to have the same struggles all the time, but sometimes like this is an example of having a difficult time asking for help. This seems to be resonating with a lot of people. So, and there's also the culture, sometimes the gender things that we do too. Like, I mean, it's a classic example, but men are not supposed to ask for directions or help or whatever, and I do think that we are thankfully starting to really deconstruct those gender norms, which have been incredibly harmful for everyone. But we're not there yet, so there's like the remnants and the residue of like this old programming and this old messaging that a lot of us have just internalized. And, I was writing, there was someone else had an essay this week about sort of being harassed online. And I responded and I said, I was talking about times in my own life that I've been harassed in person, online, and that we should never normalize this, and that it's a painful reality. It's a thing that I think about because I do have a daughter heading out into the world, and it enrages me to think of not being there if, something hits the fan. And I mean, I've done everything in my power to prepare her, but it's still, it is, I feel like I could breathe fire at the thought of someone harassing my child, it's just, yeah. And so anyway, I wrote this comment about that, about being harassed and how really we shouldn't normalize it. And a woman responded and she said, I am willing to help you turn your complaint into insight, using her system, just pay me, blah, blah, blah. And it's thank you, but no thank you. Like, your internalized misogyny is showing, and your toxic positivity also showing. Like, I have the insight that I'm looking to glean. I'm good, thank you. It is a legitimate complaint, right? Like, we shouldn't have to worry about going for a run as girls or women in this world and thinking we might not make it home. Like, we shouldn't have to worry about walking by construction sites or anywhere else. Like, none of these things. We shouldn't worry about walking down the street at night and, oh, there's a man behind me 20 feet. Am I safe? We shouldn't have to worry about what we're wearing or how much we've had to drink or any other thing. But, all you have to do is kind of like pay attention, and that we're not there yet. Like, we're not where we need to be. And that is a legitimate thing to be raging against the machine, right? And to be talking about and to be feeling like this is not acceptable. So no, I'm not looking to turn that complaint into any further insight than the insight I already have. Thank you. But this is the environment. One of the things I was talking about is a point in time where I had first moved to Los Angeles. I was teaching a yoga class, and this man began to stalk me, and I was scared, and I didn't have a support system out here yet. I didn't have friends that I could turn to. I went to the two people that I knew I should be able to ask. This man, he started sending me emails. He followed me home 6 miles from class in his car, so that when I pulled into my driveway, he pulled up behind me, blocked my driveway. I get out of my car, I'm standing there, and he's there, and I was, shaking. And he said he wanted to give me the CD, and he kept trying to catch me at the light, but then he knew where I lived, and I went to the police. He showed up at the class where I was practicing, not only where I was teaching, because I had made the mistake of sharing that information with my class. And so he showed up there, and my teacher I went right over, and I'm like, I feel so uncomfortable. Like, this is not please ask him to leave. Like, I don't feel safe with him here in this room. And he wouldn't ask him to leave. And then I went to the manager of the place where I was teaching, and I showed her the emails. I told her he had followed me home. I'm like, please ban him from my class. Like, this is not normal. This doesn't feel okay. And she was like, I can't do that. Like, he's a member, And so nobody would help. And then I went to the police because I felt like this is how women get killed. And they were basically like, we can't do anything yet. Driving and handing you a CD does not rise to the level of like a real threat, but come back if something that does rise to the level of a real threat should ensue. Well, what do we need to happen? Does he need to attack me before it's good enough for me to get some help? So eventually that is what happened. He came and pounded on my door, and I called the police, and then they came. But we shouldn't have to get to that point. And the whole time I was feeling so alone in the experience, and I was asking for help and I was being denied. So sometimes it is the culture that is compounding the message, don't ask for help, unless you're like being physically harmed. And even then there's bystander syndrome. Sometimes people just freeze. They don't know what to do, or they don't want to get in the line of fire. And that's another thing that can happen too, is if you're being targeted online, it's really hard to ask people to show up for you, because then they may become a target of something that is unhinged. And you don't want to ask your friends to put themselves in harm's way. So there's a lot of things that can come into play. Most of them have to do with your wiring. That's part one. And part two is a lot of these things where you really legitimately need help, depending on how you feel, like, there might be more, it might feel to you like there's more shame in asking than there is in just trying to figure it out on your own. And so a few weeks ago, I'm not going to get into it, but we all have our things, life, the way that we have, the world that we're living in is not always compassionate, right? There's a lot of things happening in the world that are painful to take in and shocking. We get numbed, but there's just so many things happening in the world that are devastating and hard to integrate, like it's like we're not getting it, we're not getting the memo of, okay, we're one people on one planet and we need to learn how to coexist here peacefully, share the resources, let everybody figure out what makes sense for them, as long as nobody's harming me or my, loved ones. Like, I don't need to be minding someone else's business. Like, we're not getting it. And so it's painful, and sometimes it feels so disheartening that the idea of sticking your hand up and saying like, hey, I'm struggling, it's not appealing. So a few weeks ago, I was having a moment. I'm a human being. It happens, right? I was having a moment where I was just feeling just that feeling of like, I probably just need a really good cry. And sometimes what happens is I just miss my mom. Like, I miss her so much that it overtakes me, and it happens multiple times a week where I'm just suddenly overcome, like something will happen or nothing will happen, and I'm tears. And grief is another one where people want you to be on a timeline. It's like, well, it's been a year, so you should be okay now. It's like, grief doesn't work like that, friends. Grief is something that you're probably carrying with you for the rest of time if it's someone incredibly significant to you. And probably the ways that you carry it will shift and change. Presumably, and certainly the first year after my mother died, it was the worst. That's when I was just fighting to keep my head above water and not always succeeding. But there's no finish line for that either. Just like there's no finish line for healing, there's no finish line for grieving. So I was having a moment, and it wasn't just about my mom. It was about a lot of things, a lot of pressure and just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of confusion. And I had just finished teaching a class, and one of my friends had texted me, and I have been gifted with amazing friends. Like, I really am. I'm so lucky. I have really excellent people in my life. And a very small handful of them understand me really, really, really well, like really well. And when you have people like that, it's a treasure, right? Like it's you want to cherish those people with your whole heart. Because it's so beautiful to be seen and understood without having to say anything. And so anyway, I just finished teaching and we were like texting, and she said, "How are you doing?" or whatever. And I said, "Oh, I'm just re-examining all of my life choices right now." And I was doing the gallows humor thing, which is a typical thing for people that grew up with uncertainty and trauma. Like, you don't want to be like sad and dark all the, you learn how to, like, you're tough, right? You've got it. You've got this. And I lead a community, right? Like, I'm teaching yoga and I'm teaching meditation and I'm writing books and I'm writing essays and I'm, doing podcasts. Like, I've got it together. Like, I'm here to help. That's my job. It's good for me to have a few people in my life who are like, you don't have to do that right now. It's okay if you need a minute. Like, it's fine. It's essential for me to have people like that in my life. Thankfully, I do. So anyway, I said I need to re-examine all my life choices. And then I said, I'm totally fine. It's nothing that a long walk with my dog won't solve. And she wrote back and she said, "Ha ha." And then she said, "But seriously, are you okay?" So I then spent about 10 minutes writing texts about like where I was at and what was going on with me, and deleting and writing and deleting. Because I'm like, I don't want to like burden anyone. I know I'm going to be fine. I'm just having a moment. I know how to soothe my nervous system. Like, I don't need to unload this on anyone. Like, I was going through that whole thing in my mind, deleting. So, but for her, she's just seeing these 3 dots as you do when you're like waiting for somebody to respond. And after 10 minutes, she called me. Like, my phone lit up in my hand and I was like, oh. So I'm like, hello. And she's like, what is going on? And so we talked for like 2.5 hours about everything, just everything. Like, I talked about all the things that were like on my mind. I cried a little bit, and then it was like in 10 minutes, that part was done and we were on to like other things and laughing. It was great. So hopefully we all have people like this in our lives who can just look at 3 blinking dots and say to themselves, something's going on with this person. They might be texting me, I'm fine, everything's fine, I'm okay, everything's okay. But really the message underneath is, please send help. And you want to do your best to cultivate those genuine relationships in your life with people who are truly going to see and understand you and know how to help without being asked. And for me, I will tell you that running into the line of fire for people I care about, I don't even have to think about it. And that's, it doesn't matter if it's happening online or in life. If someone I love is, whatever it is, being harassed or being attacked in any way or going through anything or has lost someone, or like I'm running, but when it's me, I'm struggling and it's probably like 3 dots, because like it's much more comfortable for me to be the helper than the helpee. And so it's ongoing work. And I was saying that like in my life, I have for many years, like when I was 13, I started going to therapy. I didn't want to go to my dad's house anymore. And it like lit up this whole situation, and started talking to a therapist. And I was in therapy pretty consistently from like 13 to 26. With some gaps, of course, but like it was incredibly helpful for me as a kid trying to process all the stuff that was happening in the 2 different households, and having somebody there to validate some of these feelings of helplessness and confusion, and trying to make sense of what was coming at me. It was incredibly helpful. For me, what happened when I got to, be in like my mid 20s, I just was like, I don't want to. I could have told you if you'd asked me like, well, so what's your stuff? Like, what are your things that you're working on? I could have listed them for you. I could have written a dissertation. Well, I have abandonment issues because like my whole life exploded when I was 4. And I could have told you everything. But I really felt like I don't want to be stuck. Like, just because, my grandmother died, my dad left, my mom left me at a farm for a while. Like, I don't want to be someone who's like, okay, I understand that I have major fear of abandonment, but is that as far as I get to go? Like, do I have to be someone who has deep fear of abandonment because of something that happened when I was 4? And so for the rest of my life, anytime I'm close to anyone, if they're going on a trip or they're walking out the door, I'm like having feelings, because I don't want to be ruled by stuff that like I had no control over. And for me, the thing that was the next level, essential piece of like my healing experience was the yoga, because I needed something somatic, right? I needed to be in my body, breathing deeply, paying attention to sensation, learning how to trust myself. And I had to start at the very low level of like, I think I'm in a 90-degree bend. Am I in a 90-degree bend? Let me put my hands on my body and figure it out. That is how much I didn't trust my own perception, because I'd spent so many years of my life being gaslit. I think mom has a problem. I think she's drinking too much. I think this rage is like out of control, and people saying, no, it's your perception. So I came out of that not trusting my ability to perceive reality clearly. So I had to relearn that. I had to rewire that and say to myself, no, if I feel like I'm in a 90-degree bend, I'm going to check. Yeah, I'm in a 90-degree bend. I can trust that. And that's how kind of like basic I had to get. And it was for everything. It was like, okay, I was not a gymnast as a kid, and I didn't like to dive headfirst into water. I think the loss of control, I became very like, how can I control my environment so that I won't be hurt or left or surprised? Like, how can I read the room and figure everything out and be helpful so that I can be as safe as possible? And so I was not a kid who was attracted toward things that felt like scary or out of control. So I wasn't the kid who was doing, I wasn't doing handstands and all that stuff. So I had to learn that from the ground up on my mat, and facing that fear and breathing through it and having breakthroughs. For me, it's never been about the poses. It's like, it's the process. It's the process. It's the fear that you overcome on the way to the pose. That's where the freedom is, and then you're like, oh, wow, I did something I didn't think I could do, and I didn't kill myself. I'm here, I'm intact, and I did it, and I can keep doing it, and this is amazing. I've strengthened, right? So I had to have that experience in my body of working with these feelings of fear or doubt or, am I worthy? Like all that stuff. And that was kind of like the next piece of the puzzle. And knowing yourself is going to be at the heart of any, I think, meaningful spiritual practice of any kind, whatever it is that speaks to you. So there's so much that you can move through and get through and work on, but there's no end line. The line is, let me keep my mind open and my heart open, and let me stay curious about how I'm feeling and what's true for me right now. It might be different than what was true for me last week, and it might be different than what's true for me next week. And let me not try to like put myself in a box and stamp labels all over. I'm this kind of person. I feel this way about, give yourself some freedom to surprise yourself, and then just recognize, the things that are still works in progress. For me, asking for help when I need it is still a work in progress. And it's such a gift that I have some people in my life who don't make me ask, who are like, I know you and you are being quiet. Like, I bet you could use a little bit of help right now, or a good laugh or a good cry. And those are your essential people. Those are your folks that you want to like really make sure they know how much you treasure them. And I for sure do. And in the instance that I'm talking about, I tagged the person who was looking at my 3 dots and knowing like I wasn't okay. And in this case, it was Lauren Huff, who's like an incredible writer. And I hope you're already following her and that you've read her book. And, you know, she's fantastic. But I have a handful of people like that in my life who are really, really good at knowing when I could use some help. And it's just a huge gift and not something that I ever take for granted. And at the same time, I'm still going to keep working on this because I want to get better at it. And I want to be able to say, I'm actually not okay right now, you know, and I could use a little help and be fine with that. I think it's a worthwhile thing to work on for all of us, you know, for all of you who were like, oh, this essay, like, I feel like you're seeing into my soul. Great. Let's all work on it, you know, because we all need help sometimes. It is not realistic to think you are going to have it all together every minute and you're never going to need to just like fall apart. We need each other. We need people. We need support. We need to be real with each other. You don't have to make it all pastel and shiny. You know, stay away from the toxic positivity, people. Just like be real, you know, be real, be yourself. And you don't have to do anything, but like, I think at least have a handful of people that you can be really open with and real with so that you feel understood and you feel seen and you give people an opportunity to show up for you. And that's the last thing I'm going to say before we wrap it up. But one of the most amazing things is, and I will also, like the people that recognize it when you struggle to ask for help are the people who also struggle to ask for help. It's, you know, the language. You're like, oh, this person they just can't say I need some help, or could you back me up, or would you help me fight back on this? Like, they don't want to ask. So that's what I'm saying. Like, if you have a sense that you're dealing with someone who's struggling, like, just help. Don't wait to be asked, because for some people it's really difficult. You know, but I mean, obviously every situation's different. Like, sometimes people really don't want help. So you've got to kind of like walk the line. But when you know someone well, put it that way, if you know somebody well and you know that this is a struggle for them, just show up with the help. Don't wait for the request if you can manage it. And, you know, and also hope that they're working on it. It is an amazing thing when you ask for support and you receive it. I was talking about what happens when you ask for support and you're denied. But when you ask for support and you receive it, it is like, it's such a good feeling. And when you cannot bring yourself to ask for help, you're denying the people who would show up. You're denying them the opportunity of finally giving you something, right? Like, if you're the one that's like always trying to help and do and be and show up, it's so nice for people to be able to say like, wait, it's your turn. I'm going to be here for you now, you know? And if you can't ask, you're not letting people show up for you. So you're also, if it helps, you're also, robbing other people of the really good feeling it is to show up and to help and to support. You know, that's a good feeling. So sometimes for those of us that are, you know, still doing this work to get better at it and to have an easier time of making those requests, remind yourself that for a lot of people, being able to give is like, it's the best feeling there is. So I hope that this talk was helpful, that it gives you some things to think about if you do struggle, why that might be. Always go back to your wiring. Always try to go back and figure out, okay, what happened in my family of origin? Doesn't mean you have to go back with like anger. You just go back and like examine like what did I learn about what was my role? And if I did ask for help, was help given? Like, what is my relationship with asking for help? And if I struggle with it, like, let me try to figure out why. The more you can bring these things kind of into the light, the more you can solve them, right? Like, move through them, work with them. And I think that's good stuff. I think it's good stuff. So thank you so much. And for those of you who like this topic really, you know, resonated for you, it's so gratifying to read your comments and get your emails and messages. I just, you know, it absolutely, like, I feel it right in my heart, and I love you, and you're not alone. And we work through these things together, right? We work through them together. So I do hope that this was helpful for you, and thank you for joining me. And I will be back very soon, but you know where to find me.